All right, our third topic this week. We keep seeing reports. Now, Tunde and I are both in South Florida, so it's warm, most of the year, and but it doesn't really go, it doesn't go too crazy to the high or too crazy to the low. It's just always between maybe mid 90s and mid 70s. But reports around the country, around the U.S., have been, these record-breaking temperatures this summer. And there was a spate of it a month ago, and we're in one now, heat domes and all this other stuff. And, really wanted to ask the question or wanted to have a discussion about, what's going on here with the heat waves and whether people are desensitized to it. And also whether or not, or how we plan to pay for, the increased costs that come along with the more extreme weather, whether that be the rain or the storms or just the AC, the air conditioning that's needed to keep functioning the way we function in these these heat domes. So, Tunde, seeing the reports of all the record breaking heat and and so forth, and just kind of the storms and stuff that we've been seeing. Do you think that this is kind of an exaggeration? We're looking at it from afar in many respects. But do you think that these are exaggerated reports, or do you think that people maybe are desensitized to it? Because if you look at this stuff just in the abstract, it looked like we should be considered this kind of a 5-alarm fire as far as what's going on. So as far as our environment, wherever we are, becoming less hospitable than it was. So just what is your reaction to seeing this?
Yeah, I think that we are becoming more desensitized to it is my direct answer. But like many other things in our society that have crept up, and one could look back, like let's say 10, 20 years ago, if you took a time machine and asked someone, hey, if this were to happen in our country, what do you think the outcome, how do you think people would react? And back then people would probably be like, oh my God, this would be crazy.
People would be
so
freaking
an example
out.
I'm thinking of, no, but just to give a different example and go somewhere else, there's things like mass shootings. I remember seeing a report on July 1st of this year, which is the 50, halfway through the year, 50 yard line of the year, that we had 255 mass shootings in the United States so far the first half of 2024. And there's only 365 days in a year. So if I were to take a time machine 40 years ago to 1984 and stick a microphone on the street in people's face and say, what do you think American people would do if we had more mass shootings in the first half of the year than there were days in the year or the first half of the year? I'm sure that we would get a different assumption of how people will respond than how we're seeing us as a society deal with it today. Right now, we don't even talk about it, right? And I think it's the same thing as it comes to climate. If you were to go back 100 years ago and ask somebody, what do you think would happen if, we had storms getting worse, sea levels rising, temperatures were hotter, people dying of more of heat strokes, all this? Do you think society would be alarmed to want to do something? I'm sure they would assume yes.
Yeah.
But here we are, and everything I just said has been happening for the last, decade or two, much more pronounced to the point where guys like you and I in our mid 40s can see a difference in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And like you said about living in South Florida. And so,
you illustrate that. I know, with you, because you're a boater, you've talked about how you've observed this as being on the water in terms of the sea walls.
Yeah. Well, here, I'll say, I was going to save this for later, but I'll get it out now, which is you're absolutely right. And for the audience, what I've told to not only James, but other friends in private, I've been boating since 2017. So it's 7 years, right? It's not a super long time in terms of the geological history of the earth, right? And in the same area where I'm in South Florida and the intercoastal here is because there's a lot of construction in Florida because there's a lot of money being invested here. So I'm looking at
especially
houses
along the waterways that
especially along the waterway,
people take boats.
All that PPP money and all that Bitcoin money that came down here. So, but on a serious note, I've seen houses being built in 2018, 2020, 2022. So, but what happens is what I can see is the new seawall regulation. And there's houses I saw built in 2021, let's say, and there's houses right now I'm seeing being built next to those houses. And the new house on the seawall is 3 feet higher, 2 to 3 feet higher than the house that was just built a couple years ago. And what it tells me is this is both the insurance company as well as the city who's giving the permit, the municipality like the city of Fort Lauderdale giving the permit. And that to me is like when the money speaks, when the insurance carrier forces certain things, and when the municipality is saying in order for us to not have a financial disaster in the next hurricane, we're now requiring you to build a seawall this much higher. That's what tells me that this is undeniable, because this isn't about a woke ideology. It's not about any of that. It's about the bottom line. And when companies and cities start showing you by their own actions that they're worried about their bottom line based on sea levels, that tells us it's been rising. Besides what my eyes can show.
Yeah, the bottom line matters, and we'll get to that. But yeah, I think there's a level of desensitization. I think you illustrated it well. There's the old kind of story that I think I've heard it with I heard it with the frogs primarily, but I've heard it with crabs more recently, because some people say, "Oh, the frog piece isn't true," but it's just, if you stick a frog in water and you boil the water, the frog won't jump out because the water temperature rises slowly. If you try to throw a frog into boiling water, it'll jump right back out. And so it's the acclimation of the water warming slowly. The frog doesn't notice it. Is the story, and some people might not like that story or that kind of parable or whatever. But it reminds me of that, basically, and actually maybe a little too spot on in terms of actually warming, but just that when something happens more gradually, you are less prone to notice it happening. And so I think that's really what's happening with us here, because, and I want to get to the money piece of it, because that to me is the part that I think is really the question that we're going to have to grapple with. Like the science is pretty clear from everywhere but fossil fuel companies. And, I guess people that from an ideological standpoint want to harm the earth, but, or want to make the earth less hospitable, I should say. But our reaction to it, and again, that's a lot of times what I think is more interesting is kind of our reaction to what's happening around us. Is when I'm looking at the temperatures that they're talking about, around the country and so forth, and how these temperatures are staying persistent. Whether it be in the Midwest or the East right now, we've seen it out West, or fires, and things like that. And there are you would hope that at a certain point, and you would think going back, at a certain point, people's survival instinct will kick in and say, we have to do something about this. We have to make this priority one, and so forth. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing actually a lot of deflection, and we'll see conspiracies, and lasers are starting fires, and, fantastical stuff, and this is okay, so do we need something? We need things to happen rapidly or suddenly for that instinct to kick in. But or otherwise, are we just going to get boiled alive like the frog in the pot? And so that to me is what I'm wondering. And the money pieces, which I'll go ahead and get to now, that we're seeing in that, whether it be, recovering from storms, whether it be rain or, hurricanes or, things like that, or just the running of AC, air conditioning, so people don't die in the extreme heat. Remember, in Florida, while a lot of homes are built to account for the fact to dissipate heat, when you're up north, when you're in the Midwest or the East or whatever, a lot of the homes there are, because cold was generally the bigger threat, they're meant to hold heat, for the wintertime. And so it's really difficult to keep things hospitable in those environments. So just in terms of the power usage that we're going to need and so forth moving forward, where do you think we're going to go with this? And I mean, I guess people will find something to blame, but the increasing costs, do you think as a society we're prepared to absorb these costs, or to defray these costs? Or what do you think as a society we're going to be able to do over time as the costs of climate change, or just increasingly inhospitable temperatures, or inhospitable environment, it keeps becoming more of a reality?
Well, I'll make it short that it's going to be all the fault of DEI when this all goes down. So that'll make it quick and easy, and we can
Soros,
end the show.
Man, it's going to be Soros.
Yeah. And the lasers. Don't forget this. You were right about the space lasers. So, well, that's honestly, man, that I say that as a joke, but it's kind of one of those jokes that's the funny and not funny because it's true, right? Like that's what
laugh
concerns
now, cry
me.
later.
Yeah, well, it's cry now and cry later, I think. But no, it's because here's kind of my attitude of this climate stuff, right? So I'll put it here. I believe that the climate has been increasing at a more rapid pace in the last 100 years due to the human producing of fossil fuels and other things that, and it's not just fossil fuels. I mean, the fact that we have so many cities in the world that have concrete and the buildings and all that, it's been proven that those things trap heat. And think about how hot black tar in the street gets when you got millions of square miles of that around the world. It heats up the earth. So there's a lot of reasons why why modern society today has caused heating of the earth. Now, I say that to say that am I blaming humans for being bad and blaming everybody? No, I'm just stating a fact. Now, I'm also of the mindset that we're not going to reverse it at this point. So I'm not sitting here trying to say that means we have to cut off fossil fuel tomorrow. Everybody goes solar, and somehow we're going to reduce the heat in my lifetime that has been put out there. I don't believe that either. I think this is a new plateau, and let's try and continue to slow the rate of heat increase going forward, hopefully. And what my concern is that takes actual leadership, both within one society as well as coordination amongst the global society. And it's tough enough to get people in one country or one society to agree on everything, on this stuff, this kind of big ideas of how do you move energy and how do you do all this stuff. And if we had the proper leadership, we would be having these conversations in our society right now of how do we prepare for what we know is coming. Number one, the increase in the power of storms and the erosion of coastal environments where we already know 70% of the world's population lives on coast. So what are we probably going to see more of? We're probably going to see more of human migration, like the people from the Middle East trying to get to Europe, except last decade was from ISIS. Next decade might be from climate change and that people can't live in the desert anymore. It's just too hot. Remember this year at the Hajj in Mecca, 1,700 people, I think, died of heat, overheating. It got to 125 degrees. So if this continues, then there's going to be sections of the planet that may be uninhabitable. So human societies generally don't respond well to shocks of migration from new people. So maybe we should be planning for how are we going to deal with this when huge parts of the world need to migrate other places. The other things will be, like you're alluding to, and I'll put it back to you, like the increase of costs we're going to see domestically. Things like insurance premiums, all that. I would ask you, how do you think we're going to deal with that as a society?
Well, see, now, I think that I'm going to go to a Tunde truism. And that to me is you have to consider whether you're looking at things from a lens of scarcity or a lens of abundance. The costs that we are going to experience by doing nothing, we can see that's going to continue to escalate. And they have escalated over the last 10 years, 20 years, whatever, and they're going to continue to escalate because the power demands and the rebuilding demands, or the demands to try to fortify things for what's coming, that's going to continue to go up. But we can look at it in a different way, and that there can be economic opportunity here, that by preparing society for dealing with what's coming, there's going to be economic opportunity by coming up with technologies that will mitigate some of the problems. So there's been leaps and bounds in technology in terms of dealing with this kind of carbon capture and all this other types of stuff. There'll be more. I think the biggest concern, and the thing that bothers me the most, is the collective lack of will as a society to try to address this problem. I'm pretty sure that if our society, just the United States, if the United States decided to take a leadership role and say, we're going to solve this problem in the same way that the United States decided to go to the moon, that this would be something that could be addressed and that could put the world on a completely different trajectory, and that a lot of people would make a lot of money in doing so. But what my concern is that right now, and this goes to the leadership, like you were saying, that the prevailing kind of sentiment amongst some leaders is to try to either deny it or to try to demonize people because of it, or like blame, things like that. Everything but trying to address it, which I think is a huge opportunity being left on the side, for whatever reason. And so that to me is the bigger concern, is that the will, and I don't know. You and I have talked about this offline, like. You would think, just pure logic. And again, pure logic doesn't work when you're breaking down the activity of humans. But you would think from a pure logic standpoint that at a certain point, things would get so bad that humans would say, all right, enough, we're going to figure this out. But what may end up, what we're seeing with a lot of things, and what we may see here, is that as things get worse and worse, people just blame random things, to your joke at the beginning of this, more and more. And it doesn't galvanize people, it tears people apart. And so a lot of that's leadership, and a lot of that is how we're interacting and engaging with each other. So I think, though, that if we look at this the right way, there's a huge opportunity. This is, life isn't about what happens to you, it's about how you respond. and that's one of, those truisms, you can get like from self-help, but that works as a society as well. Like this is happening. This has happened to us, or this, we've contributed to it, but this is what's happening. So how are we going to respond? I think is the real question that we need to be answering. And what the type of leadership that we look to in order for a response. Do we want a leadership that looks to blame and looks to deflect, or do we want a leadership that looks to say, hey, let's make this an opportunity. Let's make this something that we can grow from and build something better.
Yeah, and the sad part to me, just as we round that out, with finishing up talking about leadership, is what's sad is that somehow the environment and this whole topic of climate and all that, somewhere along the line in the last generation or two, really became a political football, where people feel like they have to line up on one side or another of that debate based on what political side of the discussion they're on. And so,
why that is, right? Because fossil fuel companies have better lawyers and better lobbyists than tobacco companies.
All right. Well,
tobacco tried to do that. They weren't able to pull it off, but the fossil fuel companies were able to pull
honestly,
it off.
I think your point about the boiling frog is correct, meaning it's a lot harder to convince people that something that you can see people smoking in their lungs and then getting lung cancer and those kind of things. It's a lot harder to say that's fine and don't worry about it.
You say that at this time. If you said that in 1970, though, people might think.
But what I'm saying is, and that's your point, that it has to get bad enough. And maybe, when we have I think that the recent Hurricane Beryl was the first one they're considering making a Category 6, first time in history, a hurricane. So if this gets worse and more infrastructure damage and all that, maybe we'll have the same thing where enough of the population decides that.
Well, that's the logic. But the thing is that what we're maybe more prone to is more blame. Like, again, it's going to be about DEI. Hurricanes are worse because
I
of
agree.
DEI.
Well, and that's where I was going is, unfortunately, because it's become ideological. I mean, look, today is the date is July 16th. I'm looking at an article from a week ago, which was July 9th. Title, House Backs Bill to Roll Back Efficiency Standards for Refrigerators and Dishwashers. And it's just like so with everything going on in the world, the United States Congress, seriously, has decided to spend their time to attack dishwasher and refrigerator efficiency standard regulations.
To make them less energy efficient, yeah.
To make them less energy efficient for whatever reason. Even though that would help people's bottom line at home to spend less money every month on energy costs. Yeah. So that's an ideological thing. It's not about practicality. And I'll give you an even better one, which I got a big issue with our governor in our state of Florida. We live in Florida, which is a panhandle, which is sticking out there in the middle of the ocean and is right in what they call Hurricane Alley.
Peninsula. We have a panhandle, but we have a peninsula.
Yeah. Sorry. Panhandle's the Tallahassee area. Sorry. Yeah. I feel like an idiot because I love the state. Sorry, Florida. But the thing is, so here's the thing. This is where ideology kills me. So we, as part of just a regular thing between the federal government and the states, we had an opportunity to receive $700 million from the federal government to deal with pollution and climate-related issues. Now, to me, pollution is separate from climate. There's people that do have a different opinion than me and that don't believe that the climate's been affected by human use of fossil fuels and all that. I'm not going to argue that point. But I think all of us can agree when we see plastic bottles in the waterways, if there's oil leaks and all that, that's pollution. That's
freedom.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different show. But I appreciate.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. It is for some people. Yeah. So, but the idea is, my point is, I learned going to some nonprofit organization about helping the Everglades a year ago that in Broward County, where we live, only 40% of the things we put in to recycling are recycling bins that the municipality spends time and money making us separate, and they have special trucks that come and bring it for recycling. Only 40% of that gets recycled. And one of the reasons is because we don't have enough recycling facilities. So part of my thought was, why would the governor of Florida, who like you said, we're peninsula, we're in Hurricane Alley, we have coastlines that are eroding due to the rising sea levels. We've got aquifers, that freshwater aquifers under that are getting, penetrated by seawater now because of the rising sea levels. Why Why would he turn away $700 million of federal money that doesn't have to come from our state taxes and coffers and all that, when we know we have issues with pollution and we could build more recycle plants and all that to help with this? At the end of the day, it's ideology, and that's it. Because if the next president who comes in is of his party and offers the same money, he'll take it. But because the current president isn't, he won't. And that's, to me, like you said, that's the direction we're going to go. I don't think we're going to unite on this. It's now ideological, and you got to be on one side or the other. And that, to me, is sad because it's at the expense of all of us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the current trajectory. I mean, as long as that kind of behavior is either believed to be rewarded or is in fact rewarded, and that plays back into, us as people, we the people in the country, what we reward, as voters, what we pay attention to as consumers of information. And, like some of that is, like in some respects, we're in over our head because we have these biases that are built into our brain. And those are well exploited by people who want to get stuff from us, whether it be attention or votes or whatever. But ultimately, you hope that with more time, with more exposure, and a turning of generations, also that a level of sophistication in dealing with this stuff will come. I mean, the first generations that dealt with radio or TV, like they thought that there were alien invasions going on based on programs that were put on the radio. So, I mean, us having a difficult time, dealing with the new technology and so forth is not the craziest thing in the world. But
unfortunately, that hasn't changed. The people that still think we have alien invasions today. So.
Well, but I mean, I don't know. Like those people don't even get the most attention anyway. But but no, I think we got to wrap from here, man. But like I said, but ideally though, we can slowly turn this ship, towards something that where behavior that either denies the problem or tries to ignore the problem is not rewarded, and behavior that tries to get our resources behind and our ideas behind solving a problem and all the massive economic opportunity that would come with that, is the type of thing they're rewarded. So yeah.
You're always a good positive voice, James. I appreciate it. I will be quiet and not give us a reason to be negative.
Won't give us glass half empty. I appreciate that. We got to get out. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
And I'll be positive.
All right. And we'll talk to you next time.